Hi, and welcome to DocTalk, sponsored by Anima Mundi. I am Dr. A.
And I'm Dr. Vanburg.
And today we're going to talk about being in your feels. And this is something that we hear about a lot, obviously, on a day-to-day basis. People come in all the time talking about their feelings, things that they think are appropriate or inappropriate, and or even the way that I guess society would normalize or dictate what feels are appropriate and not appropriate. So jumping right in, what do you say that maybe you see the most of when people are coming in? What is their idea of feelings and or, even putting them in this box of like good feelings and bad feelings?
Yes. So I know you're going to kind of talk about this a little bit towards the end of this segment, but what I see is people coming in saying, I have this feeling and I need to not have it. So anger, sadness, these are usually the prime candidates. Someone's be like, oh, I'm angry all the time and I need to not be.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So my first thought is, why are we angry?
Absolutely.
Not stop being angry, right?
Because anger is a protective factor,
It
right?
absolutely is.
So it is important to be angry. There are certain times when one should rightly be angry.
It'd be a problem to not be angry in certain circumstances. What are you hearing? What do people come in and say to you?
I actually hear a lot of people coming in and saying, my spouse says I'm angry all the time, or my kids say I'm angry all the time, right? And so for some people, it is really good awareness that they are struggling with a particular emotion. And for other people, it is those around them in their inner circle that is telling them, hey, something's off. We're noticing that you are XYZ. We're noticing that we are, you're easy to snap or very irritable lately, or you're withdrawn from the family. You're withdrawn. You're not engaging the way that you normally do, or you seem really jumpy or on edge.
Right, and I think, again, we were going to talk about this in a minute. We'll get there. But what I love about what you just said is that list, those are observable behaviors, right? So interesting. Other folks are watching being like, hey, you're really difficult to be around, frankly, in some ways.
Yeah.
And here's all of the behaviors that are so problematic. But what we're going to do is we're going to take that one step back and talk about what are emotions. So do you want to kick this piece off?
Sure. So when we're thinking about emotions, we're thinking about this broad spectrum of emotions. And I know that we've talked before about vocabulary regarding emotions and how that can be truncated for people, but also recognizing that there is this wheel or spectrum of emotions, right? And what does that mean to feel this emotion? So we've already talked a little bit about how things like anger are appropriate. They're part of our survival mechanisms.
Right. They are the body's indicator that your boundary has been violated. In actuality or in perception, right? We can talk about that a little bit, but that's what anger means. It's the meaning of that emotion, boundary violation.
So what would we say is perception versus reality? What would you say?
That's great. The way that I describe this when I'm working with folks is there's a difference between reacting to what is here and now and what was there and then. So if I'm having a reaction to a situation that's in front of me and that reaction is largely predicated on something that happened to me, I don't know, a week ago, a year ago, 10 years ago, that lets me know that this is a perception, right? I'm overlaying a story that may or may not actually apply versus in this exact moment, here's the thing that happened, and it factually, evidence-based is a boundary violation.
And I love that you said that because I think that oftentimes people will come in too and say that they are triggered. They're triggered by something that's happened in the past that they can't let go of. Right? And that is the perception, right? And so we perseverate sometimes, or we ruminate, right? Just a fancy word for kind of overthinking. I often tell people this is when we get on the hamster wheel.
Right.
We're just thinking and thinking about that one thing, and that can lead to a whole host of other emotions. Things like guilt, shame, all kinds of things can come to play when we get stuck with certain kind of thoughts that then lead to these emotions.
You got it. Guilt is a really interesting one. That one's a pretty unpleasant emotion. It's easy to want to label it as negative, but here's the functionality of it. Guilt is the body's way of indicating that you have potentially violated your own values. The idea is that you feel bad about something so that you don't do it again. Very functional. We want to be clear, right? We don't want any of these emotions to be long-standing across very long at all. The idea is they come, they do their job,
and they go.
You appropriately react, and then we're done.
Absolutely. And I love that you hit on this kind of idea of values, because oftentimes when we do see people, there is boundary violations or violations of potentially their values, or they're doing something that's contra to their values. And we notice the tendency to, when people kind of bump up against that, they start to have a whole host of other emotions. This is where we see a lot of depressive symptoms.
Mm-hmm. Right? So sadness, right? What is the function of sadness? What does it mean?
Mm-hmm.
Loss. That's the system's way of saying something is lost. Let's slow down and feel what this is like.
And process through that.
Exactly.
Right? Instead of go, go, go.
Yes, yes.
I need you to pause.
Right.
I need you to really figure out what this is or how you're feeling, digest it, right? Mm-hmm. And then we can move forward.
Mm-hmm. Let's throw fear in here too. That's another one, right? This
Excellent.
idea that you shouldn't be afraid, perhaps, when really the function of fear is literally life-saving.
It's safety. It's survival.
Exactly.
So again, genetically hardwired into the system and has a useful purpose. Right. We don't want people to not be afraid, right? This is what keeps you from walking off the cliff, right?
Exactly. Walking in front of a bus.
Absolutely.
We don't want to do these things. We want to talk about dose, right? We don't want to be scared all the time of everything. Course. But what we're highlighting here is just the functionality of these emotions and why it doesn't make a ton of sense to say we should have some and not others.
And on top of that, when we're thinking about this, there is a healthy amount of fear to have. There's a healthy amount of emotion to have, even with these emotions that are perceived as negative, right? Mm-hmm. Not necessarily negative. They are useful, they serve a purpose, and it's important to have them. But again, we're looking at that dosage, right? How long, what is the frequency, and what is the duration? If you are afraid every day, all day, or you're afraid 8 hours of the day for most days, like that is not a good thing, right? That is activating and kicking up all kinds of other processes within the body when we think about kind of the physiological system. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But thinking about the way that this interplays with not only the thoughts that you're having, but physically how your emotions activate you.
Absolutely. I like that you named intensity. Well, you said duration and frequency. I'm going to add intensity to that. Mm-hmm. It should be an amount that matches the situation. So if I stub my toe and I'm enraged,
there's a disconnect there.
Annoyed, irritated, sure. Enraged,
couple of expletives, right?
Right. So that's another feature that we can be looking at and thinking about when we think about what does regulated, helpful, healthy emotion look like.
Which then brings in dysregulation, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that we've all seen this. This is where something happens and there's a very explosive or volatile reaction when you're like, ooh, that thing didn't merit that kind of reaction.
You named it, that's right. And I'm hearing a lot of, sometimes we have that insight, but often this is what other people will observe, like that was a lot. Mm-hmm. That was extra for that thing that just happened.
And interestingly enough, a lot of times people don't come in for help until others have started to identify the behaviors associated with that emotion that the person is actually having.
And maybe let's talk about that for a moment. It may sound really simplistic, but there is a world of difference between an emotion and a behavior. They are not the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I can be angry and not cause harm or damage or do violence. The emotion is one thing, and then the behaviors are something that we get to make choices about if we are being thoughtful and responsive rather than reactive based on how we feel.
Absolutely. I think that that is key. So we definitely have control over the behavior. And I see this a lot with people that I see people who come in, and we'll talk a little bit, one, about kind of anger in particular, right? And so I might get the story of, I don't know, Dr. A, this guy, pissed me off and I punched him. And I'm like, okay, well, what was a thought that you were having before you punched him? I didn't have a thought. I just punched the guy, right? There has to be this connect, right? And you may not realize it in the moment, but if you were to stop and take a breath, you would start to identify what it is that you were feeling that led to that behavior. And so oftentimes in this one, it is a feeling of disrespect. They disrespected me. They violated my boundaries, right? And then the behavior behind it was then, okay, I punched this guy, right? Recognizing that there is that ability to kind of stop, take a breath. We don't have to react. We can actually learn to be more responsive. Now, I will say that this might come with additional training. It might take some training. You might need to work with a provider, a therapist, to help you become more responsive.
Yes, that's exactly it. I think that practice is the name of the game here. And I think the last thing I'll throw in is it can be really challenging when we talk about how desirable it is to be responsive rather than reactive. We do actually have to have the bandwidth to do it. So sometimes if our emotions are highly dysregulated, we're skipping that space where we have the moment to be like, wait a minute, what do I want to do?
Mm-hmm. That 0 to 100 just happens. Boom.
Exactly. And I think we're going to talk more about that in some upcoming videos. So more there soon. Stay tuned.
So thank you all for joining us today. Remember to comment, like, and subscribe.
And if you have interest in engaging us for therapy services, or you just want to learn more about Anima Mundi, please do check out the link in the description box below.
We'll see y'all later.
Thanks, guys.